to another important discussion at SciTech's Roundtable. Today we'll be discussing psychedelic therapy for TBI and PTSD. And I'm very honored to introduce our moderator, Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley is a neuroscientist from King's College London. She's a researcher in the field of cannabinoids and mental health and is currently serving as a member of the Reserved Armed Forces. Grace is also Research Director for Heroic Hearts Project UK. Thank you so much, Grace, for moderating. I'll hand this over to you to get started with this wonderful panel.
Great, thank you, Deborah. And hello, and welcome to this discussion on head traumas and their links not only to neurological disorders, but psychological ones in athletes and military veterans. We're aiming to explore how psychedelics may offer huge potential as therapeutics and aid in the healing for this population. So introducing you to the panel, first off, we have Daniel Carcello. Many of you may already be familiar with Daniel and his story. He's a former ice hockey player, had a very successful career, two-time winner of the Stanley Cup. Though during his time playing, Daniel sustained multiple concussions and head traumas and retired from the sport in 2015. He then began to notice symptoms related to head trauma, such as slurred speech and poor cognitive function. And these coincided with the development of psychological distress, so depression and suicidal thoughts. And it was then that Daniel started looking for treatments for this and found upon psilocybin, which he now attributes to much of his recovery, and has become a great advocate for its use as well as for the protection of athletes who receive head traumas during their careers. Next, we have Jessie Gold. So Jessie spent 4 years as an Army Ranger, and that included 3 tours of Afghanistan. During this time, he had consistent exposure to explosions and large concussive forces. Jessie went on to suffer from severe anxiety and depression and was subsequently diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He found healing following attendance to an ayahuasca retreat. And from this healing, that inspired him to help others and went on to found the Heroic Hearts Project, whose aims are to offer psychedelic therapy for veterans suffering from psychological issues, and now is focusing more on veterans who are suffering following head traumas. And finally, Adam Bramlage. So Adam is the CEO and founder of Flow State Micro. He works with professional athletes, veterans, and clients to educate them on psilocybin and develop individualized protocols and dosages for microdosing. Further to this, Adam has co-founded the microdosing movement and the microdosing support network, which are both online, offering courses and support around microdosing. Adam started off in cannabis, but turned to psychedelics after he himself treated his own treatment-resistant depression using psychedelics. So I myself come to this as a neuroscientist and have found particular interest around the idea that head trauma leads to psychological problems, and the damage caused from head trauma may underlie some of the etiology of some psychological problems, such as depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And the first 2 of them we know have shown great improvement from the use of psilocybin in both observational and now clinical trials. So how much, to Jessie and Daniel, were you aware that head traumas could have been an underlying cause behind some of your psychological symptoms? I'll ask that to Jessie first.
Thanks, Grace, and pleasure to be here with everybody, and great panel. Very excited for this. So as you mentioned, as a ranger, it was not only the concussive force, but also we did a lot of airborne operations. And so jump out of planes, hit the ground hard. There's just a lot of just wear and tear to your brain, your body throughout the whole process. They've actually started talking about something called the operator syndrome, is because what they found is a lot of, especially special operations veterans were experiencing the similar sort of issues. And, you know, part of it might have been PTSD, but then there also does seem to be a heavy sort of physical issue as well. And so as a mortarman in the Rangers, which for those that aren't familiar, mortars are high projection rockets, and when they go off, there's this huge concussive force you feel in your chest. It shakes everything. And we had gunners that we would have so many mortars shot down range, it would actually have a bloody nose. And, they'd be like punch drunk afterwards, essentially. And when I was getting out of the Rangers, not one person mentioned the words head trauma. It was all just sort of the psychological side of things. And so when I started going on my path and I was really like having issues, and it seemed well beyond just sort of an experiential, it seemed well beyond anything of like this specific moment that I can remember that I know caused me trauma. It was almost like this, like an injury. My body was unhealthy and I couldn't figure it out. And none of the help that was provided to me even gave me clues about that. And so I had to almost do my own sort of diagnosis research. And it's really on this journey, as we learn more about psychedelics, more about the brain, more about the connectivity, that it's not just a PTSD, it's not just a psychological issue. And so that leads us to explore more and possibly this more holistic thing. And so one of the things we're also looking into is gut microbiome and general health, and what's your social network. All these things relate to mental health and physical health, and they're all connected, and we're learning more about that. And so it was really sort of a journey for me, and we still don't know because there's not a lot of evidence, there is a lot of evidence, but there's not a lot of research right now. And that's what I think everybody here is trying to promote, prove, and extrapolate out.
Great. That's really interesting. The same question to Daniel, but also a bit more specifically, when you sought out psilocybin therapy, did you see it as a potential treatment for your head trauma? And how did you realize or start to notice the effects of the psilocybin on the more obvious head trauma symptoms that you had?
Yeah, so like Jesse, I played in, and thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you for having me. Grace, thanks for moderating this. I played in a professional sports league that is the last professional sports league to admit a link between repetitive head trauma and neurodegenerative disease. And still today, they do not admit that link. And so if they don't see a problem, there's definitely no solution. So there was no proper baseline, no proper diagnosis, no proper rehabilitation, no proper optimization, which now we know that is possible. And so when I left at the age of 30, just dealing with light sensitivity issues, noise sensitivity, slurred speech, anxiety, depression that ultimately grew to suicidal ideation, my Players Association had no idea where to send me. And so I'm not the type of person to wait around, the type of person to build myself. And so became my own patient advocate and really dove into the TBI space, and quickly realized that there's no standard of care. There's a lot of people trying to help. Some are really well-intentioned, some not so much. And so I was forced to do things to try to recover my brain health through, talking to the best CT pathologists, concussion pathologists, going to concussion clinics, going to brain banks, reading PubMed papers, just trying to really understand what was happening. And I got to a point where, you can only do so much self-deprivation and these things to manage symptomology. Got to a point where I was just extremely hopeless, because I did this for the better part of 4 years, just searching for anything, and got to a point financially where I couldn't sustain it anymore. And so, hopelessness creeps in. The number one cause of death after TBI is suicide. And those were very real thoughts for me. And I remember one day, like sitting in my apartment, my house, just looking around. I had a car in the driveway. I was somewhat financially stable. I have 3 young, beautiful, healthy children and a beautiful wife that supported me through a pretty hellacious time and still standing by me. And I wanted to kill myself. And so it just didn't make sense. So I knew something was off. I knew that this was a chemical imbalance from all the research that I did, and that my thoughts that I was having weren't necessarily normal or healthy. And I'm a big believer in the world working for you if you're doing the right things. And a former teammate reached out, and that's when I took the opportunity to try psilocybin in a big dose form. And it really saved my life. You know, a lot of people ask me like, well, what was it? I can't truly explain how I felt the next morning, but with TBI survivors, we want to get to the person that we were before the injury or before all of the insults or before my career. I think that we can show that we can get even better. We can optimize our brain health by properly using this medicine in a holistic manner, 360 degrees, looking at everything, focusing on sleep, diet, nutrition, and really our perspective of the injury. And I think that's what a big dose ceremony of psilocybin really helped me shift, was my perspective that I didn't need to fight everything, everyone around me and this injury. And then just gave me hope with some of the early studies that were out there, just looking at the stimulation that it provided and the neurogenesis, which I knew is key for us to recover our brain health and really key for everybody to stave off this dementia parabola curve that we're all on. So yeah, it's been quite a remarkable journey, and hopefully now just putting more resources and funds and doing panels like this to just increase awareness and bring this first, hopefully novel validated care option to the TBI community.
Great. So, you know, all three of you at some point decided to use psychedelics for healing. And I think you, Daniel, there very much sort of covered this next question in that answer. And so starting with you, Adam, I know that you came to psychedelic treatment, you know, through the cannabis sphere. And so what was it that actually turned you on to psychedelics and made you actually choose finally to use psychedelics? And then what beliefs did you hold about them when you came to that first ceremony? And then if you could just briefly sum up, you know, exactly what doing that ceremony did for you.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to use plant medicines probably for the last 15 years. But what was most important for me in the last 3 years has been my relationship personally with psilocybin. I had never really dove into psilocybin in sacred ceremony, and since I've had the opportunity to do that in a large dose experience. I also believe strongly in the benefits of a subthreshold or microdose of psilocybin. And so I began 3 years ago to see the reports out of Johns Hopkins about the research dealing with psilocybin and depression. And I was going through a very, very challenging time, was again dealing with suicidal ideation, was extremely depressed, and I had nothing to lose. And I started self-treating myself with small amounts of psilocybin. And I noticed that it was rewiring my mind. It was rewiring my thought patterns. It was changing the way I reacted to life situations with my kids and work and life as a whole. And I believe I began to see how powerful this was as a medicine, even in these small doses. And the way I would describe it is with cannabis, I had used cannabis for years, and it was sort of like a Band-Aid over the wound. It was great day to day for palliative care, but I never really was able to dive into that wound and do the healing that needed to take that Band-Aid off and be well. And I think that that's what psilocybin did for me, is it allowed me to dive a little deeper into that wound and do the healing that was needed. And I absolutely still use cannabis in conjunction with psilocybin and believe they work well together. But I worked on myself first, and I saw such drastic changes immediately, and I felt so good that I had to share it with people that I loved.
Great, thank you. And then quickly, Jesse, the same sort of question. You know, what was it that took you to the door of that ayahuasca retreat, and what beliefs did you hold on entering it? And then, you know, how did you feel when you walked out?
Yeah, I mean, ignoring my problems until I couldn't ignore them anymore is what brought me there. Just like probably everybody else, doing the sort of like quiet soldier, I don't have any problems, you have problems sort of thing. But yeah, really just like, fortunately, there's always been some sort of intuition or some sort of back of the brain thing that saved my life multiple times. And I've grown to sort of trust and appreciate it. And so I was just in the spot where post-military, you know, on the superficial side, everything was good, similar to Daniel, where it was like, I had all the green check marks, but on the inside, I was just like, what's going on? This isn't good. And I just found myself doing riskier and riskier behavior, and just sort of this like indifference of like, like being on a motorcycle and being indifferent is not a good combination in a lot of cases. And fortunately, those red flags started just popping up of like, hey man, like you were a ranger, you were all this, like this is not you. Like where's this prime Jesse? I know it's like hiding in there somewhere. And so I like, it was over time, and I just kind of had to like assess of like, okay, what's going on? I know this isn't working. I know this job's not working. And if I continue on this path, it's going to lead to something irreversible that, I'm going to affect friends and family, myself, all that kind of stuff. Heard about ayahuasca, and I don't know, for whatever reason, and a lot of people, psychedelics, whether it's psilocybin or ayahuasca, there's a drawing factor to them, and a lot of them have this sort of inexplicable. And I came to it almost like, oh, that's for everybody else. That's not for me. I'm not a psychedelics person. Like I had no self-identity with that at all. But for whatever reason, the seed planted in my mind, and it became from I would never do that to I'm looking at plane tickets to Peru right now and giving my 2 weeks notice. And so for whatever reason, the course drew me there. I followed that, nervous, thinking I was crazy, but still following that intuition. And for me, my first ones were ayahuasca, obviously. And it was tough. It was kind of, it kicked my ass, honestly. But that gave me respect for it. It took away that recreational notion that I had, or what I thought psychedelics was. And just almost immediately, I thought I was different. And those sort of changes lasted. And Adam said in conversation before this panel started that the proving something that it's the changes that you don't expect or that you weren't looking for that really sort of prove this aspect. Because there is, obviously the placebo and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people like, oh, I'm going to change my life. And yeah, I feel great. Now my life's changed. But it was the after effects of things that started changing my life that I had no idea, or I didn't even have the intention of changing, where things that used to just throw me into this anxiety mess or this panic attack or this depression no longer hit me that same way. And what we're seeing with a lot of veterans too, which we're trying to figure out why, is veterans have a tendency to have this hypervigilance to where, in malls or in public places, that they just can't calm down because they're always on that, like, they got to be aware because that's what kept them alive. And we see a dramatic reduction in that in a lot of cases of people who go through either microdosing or these big psychedelic treatments. And it's a pretty quick adjustment. And again, it's not like a guarantee, like a prescription. We have to change our mentalities from the sort of old Western model. But the results, even on an anecdotal basis, are enough to really like, hey, let's look at what's going on.
Thank you. Yeah, you've all given really compelling stories there to the benefits of psychedelics for treating mental and potentially neurological illnesses. So I'd like to focus sort of briefly on the context of this idea of sort of being post-service. And do you feel that psychedelics might then serve, another role as a therapeutic for military and sporting veterans? So, whilst you're in service, you have very clear roles, responsibilities, and ambitions. When you leave, you sort of face the loss of that, the loss of the structure, the defined label, and furthermore, really, the belonging and love of a group. And so how much do you think that is a problem for military and sporting veterans leaving the profession? And do psychedelics, in your opinion, offer an opportunity to explore finding new purpose, the idea of, identification, diversification? And Daniel, can I ask you to answer that from the sporting perspective?
Of course, yeah. I think there's a ton of crossover between athletes and veterans in that respect, even police officers, first responders, because we live in a world that is not the real world. We play by different rules, and a lot of the same narrative, especially with vets and athletes, where it's sacrificing yourself for the good of the team or the good of the mission, and it's very much a cult-like atmosphere with its own rules, and it can weigh on people emotionally. And I always like to say, when I got out of hockey, it was by far the hardest thing I ever had to do, because I identified as, as the hockey player named Daniel rather than Daniel who played hockey. And that was because just being in that culture since 4 years old, indoctrinated, what's said in the room stays in the room. You don't tell your parents anything. You don't tell your friends anything. You don't show pain. Just a lot of these, tools that help you in sport do not help you outside of sport. And they hurt a lot. And so one of the biggest things that I try to encourage or try to show is that we're so much more, that we have to do self-discovery, and we have to figure out what makes us happy. And if going back to the community and coaching for the rest of your life and participating in that makes you happy, then awesome, keep doing that. But for guys who have this little inkling, I've always had it in my career too, where I wanted to go to concerts, I wanted to go to new restaurants, I wanted to go to museums, I wanted to learn, I wanted to read. I didn't necessarily want to be cocooned. And for people like that, I think that big dose and microdose can really, really help discover who we are as people. And after my big dose ceremony, before, I was doing nothing but isolating. I was always in my own head. I was not connecting to anyone around me, my 3 young kids or my wife. And then afterwards, all I wanted to do was pick up the phone and FaceTime them when I was on the farm and get back to them as soon as possible. I not only felt, number one, I think the most important thing is that I started to feel more connected to myself. I started to love myself. One of the biggest shifts that happened for me was negative self-talk to positive self-talk. I remember I was growing 750 hemp plants for CBD, and I drove out one morning. They were about 2 feet tall. Usually I'd call myself a loser and say they could have been 3 feet tall. But for whatever reason that morning, I had this voice in my head that said, "Hey man, wow, really good job. You've never planted a seed in your life." And I was like, what the heck was that, man? That was honestly one of the weirdest things that had ever happened to me, because I was just used to always calling myself a loser and criticizing every stride and being kind of doing everything really out of fear. And it just wasn't a good way to motivate myself post-career. So a lot of things started to shift. I loved myself, and then I was able to love my kids and love my wife and be grateful for everything around me, and really just try to carry this message to others, because it really did save my life.
Wow, that's emotional to hear almost. I'm so pleased for you that it's had such an amazing effect. Jesse, I was wondering if you could add a little bit, from the military perspective, that idea of needing to re-find purpose and perhaps that playing quite a big role in a lot of the psychological distress that veterans feel on leaving the service.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the veteran case is very interesting, as well as the athletes, because you're having these 2 stark contrasts in life and lifestyle and nearly everything, like going from a war situation or preparing to war situation to corporate role in the US are, pretty different on a scale. And so what you're seeing is how, and that's why I believe that a lot of these issues are so pronounced in veterans, because you have this sort of, not only do you have like the physical damage and the mental damage, but then you're having this drastic change in lifestyle where veterans lose that community, they lose that sense of purpose, and it's becomes more of that individualistic kind of corporate sort of mentality, and they feel this sort of absence in themselves, and that causes isolation, depression, and just makes all the other underlying issues even worse. And so I am a deep believer that certain people are meant to be soldiers or athletes or teachers or healers or educators. I think there is sort of almost this energy that draws people to these certain professions. And so like you see that with a lot of veterans, like they embody that sort of warrior spirit, that warrior energy, and still talking to them, no matter what happens, that they wouldn't have ever done anything else. And so when you have that and they're in that role, like a lot of veterans or a lot of warriors would, be in that position as long as possible until their body gave out, but that's obviously not possible. And so then they struggle on the civilian side of like finding something that has that similar purpose. So a tremendous amount of veterans go into contracting and kind of put themselves or security that are very similar jobs because it kind of gives them that sense. Or even like firefighting, there's a lot of veterans there, or the police force, because it's somewhat similar. And then others are easier to adapt to that. But there's a lot of them that are almost like this lost soul where they're just not having that purpose. And so, one, I think that is the value of psychedelics because it does almost have that reset. In traditional societies, they always had these ceremonies, these transition ceremonies, and we've sort of lost that in modern culture where is the ceremony to become a man or become an adult or become a woman? Besides for certain traditions, I didn't have that. And so I think psychedelics can be used to be like, okay, Jesse, kind of similar to Daniel, you're no longer the hockey player. What's the next phase? And how do we get rid of that baggage from the previous phase to where you can still have that as who you are, but you're not burdened to go into the next sort of aspect of life. And so what we're seeing with a lot of vets through this process is, one, it all allows them to be sort of the next phase of themselves without all the burdens. But two, it gives them that sense. There's that beauty of psychedelics that you want to give back and you want to share and you want to help others. And you have this respect for the world and nature around you, which you don't see in any other medication or therapy. And so a lot of vets want to give back. A huge amount of the veterans that we've served now are signing up for coaching, now are signing up to be ambassadors to other veterans. And it's a beautiful thing. And so through that process, they can still use that strong, determined warrior energy and now sort of face the war of, okay, well, how do I get my fellow veterans outside of this mental war that they're still stuck in? And so it's all about repurposing and finding that purpose and, finding maybe it's just part-time, maybe they can dedicate a full career to that, but still connecting to what the reasons, some of the underlying reasons why they joined in the first place.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So you've all spoke about your own kind of personal use of psychedelics, and I'm making a bit of an assumption here, but you're all talking largely, particularly in those first ceremonies, about having used a sort of macro high dose in the initial healing ceremonies. And we were just covering there the importance perhaps of, the mystical experience behind this, taking a larger dose, and how that might be important for gaining new insights. So do you feel that it is important to start with that macro dose? And how does it compare to microdosing? Do they have the same objectives? I'd like to ask that first to Daniel, because I know that you have, through your own healing journey, used both methods of macro and microdosing.
Yeah, definitely. I think they both serve a purpose. And so from what I know about the brain and TBI, we need to stimulate brain regions shut down due to trauma, wake them back up, build new neurological pathways. And then I think that shifting perspective of the injury for TBI specifically, and mental health survivors, to be honest, is really important. And I think all three of those things are achieved with a big dose. And then also, I also knew that structurally with my brain, there's a ton of damage and nothing gets fixed in 5 hours. So over time, microdosing for sure feeds those new neurons and helps me to stay in those good intentions or behaviors that were essentially broken up during the big dose ceremony. Now, I think that microdosing can do that over a longer period of time. But I was an extreme case, a very extreme case. I was still sleeping until 3 p.m. 19 months ago, extremely depressed, anxious, suicidal. And for me, like one thing that we don't talk about enough, or you don't see other CEOs talking about it because they simply don't use the medicine, but you're called to this medicine. And it's not easy. It is not easy work, as Jesse said, Adam said. But I really do think that they both have their place. It's also an and/or for me, because I've seen microdosing help people immensely. Where, like, for example, my wife, she'll never do a big dose ceremony, and that's okay because she's on the microdose. It's taken away her migraines since she was 15, like debilitating 2-day down puking type of migraines. And our family is better for it. And it wasn't me telling her to do it. It was her seeing it in me. I don't tell anybody to do this medicine. I just speak from my experience. And if you like what you see and what you hear, then this medicine will almost find you. But yeah, Adam's got some really great stories about how he helps people increase the efficacy of this medicine by focusing on diet, sleep, staying away from refined white sugars, neurodegeneratives, alcohol, just watching the intake, and focusing on a few different other elements of your life can really enhance what this medicine can do for not only your brain, but also your quality of life.
Thank you. So the same question again to Adam then about, the comparisons between macro and microdosing. And just, I know that microdosing is somewhere where you have particularly specialized. And so do you see areas where microdosing might offer, more, a better potential alternative, perhaps in people who don't have the ability to tolerate or are not prepared to take a macro dose?
Yeah, there are a lot of people out there like Daniel's partner who may never take the opportunity to take that large dose journey, and yet they can still get so much healing and so much benefit from using these medicines in subperceptual doses. I know for myself that my 72-year-old mother is microdosing, and for the first time in her life, she's not experiencing crippling anxiety. My mother will probably never eat 5 grams of mushrooms, but her life has improved so much from microdosing that I'm now working with a bunch of her friends over 70 as well. So there is a place for small doses, because not everybody wants the large doses. And there is a very important place for large doses. And I must say that I would not be here today without large doses. They really saved my life in really difficult times, right? And so it's important to remember that large doses are fully loaded, large doses. They can be beautiful, they can be challenging, whereas microdosing is more of biting off a small piece. It's more something that people can handle daily, and it's also something that can be a springboard for people. They can start with microdosing, they can work with psilocybin on a smaller level, and they can go, okay, wait, maybe in the right set and setting with a guide, I actually can step up to this larger dose. So I think absolutely that there is a space for the large dose, there is a space for the small dose, and they actually work best together. And if there's a way that you can do one large dose journey every couple of months and then integrate that with the microdosing. So it's really beautiful. They work really well together. And the simplest way for people to remember it out there that might be new to it is microdosing is going to have no classic psychedelic effects, right? The flowers aren't going to talk to you. You're not going to see the carpet moving. The doorknob's not going to look extra shiny, nothing like that. Whereas large dose, you're going to have perceptual changes. They're very different. And there's a place for both. And I think microdosing is great because it's going to benefit a lot of people who would never step up to that large dose.
Great, thank you. So I guess a question I pose to all three of you then really is, what does the journey in, having all three of you taken it look like? Let's start off, that you've come to the decision that you're going to do it, you're going to use psychedelic therapy, you found the means by which you're going to do it. How best do you harvest the benefits, maintain them, grow them, and improve on them? And is that going to look like the same for everyone? And I'll start with Jesse and then Daniel giving your own personal experience. And then if Adam, you can come in as somebody who actually helps people to make that journey, that would be really great. So Jesse, if you could take us.
Yeah, no, I kind of want to also riff a little bit off what Adam said, which just struck my mind, is because we're all talking about the same sort of thing with mental health. And if you look at, like with ayahuasca particularly, a big reason that some of these large doses, and I think, like Adam said, like having it as an option is great for those that want it. But a lot of times people are coming from this society where we don't focus on mental health, and they have 30, 40 years of all this trauma and buildup. And so they almost need that shock to the system. Whereas if you go to even a lot of these ayahuasca communities, oftentimes it's more, the focus of the tribe is so much more on the mental health side that it's not this like huge gap to get to sort of the ground level. And so that's, just in this conversation, just having a society that has more of these concerns, I think you'll even start dealing with some of these issues. And so for me, when I went to my first ceremony, it was really just a Google search, and I had no idea what I was doing. Like I said, I wasn't a psychedelic I wasn't a psychonaut at all. And so it's just kind of like, all right, let's look at this website. Okay, what, they have a pool? I don't know if I need a pool for this, all this kind of stuff. And I had no idea. And so I was just trying to do my research, and there really wasn't that much. And so I kind of had to go off my gut instinct. And, really even integration talk is a relatively new thing. And we're still sort of in the process of developing it for different people, different trauma. And when I went, it's, even though it wasn't that long ago, it was really kind of, you go there and then you're sort of left to your own devices. And so fortunately, I was able to sort of like put it together and sort of figure it out. But that was really the inspiration. One of the inspirations of Heroic Hearts Project is like, hey, this is a very powerful thing. We need to have a little bit more guide rails around it. We need to have a little bit more control, especially as this becomes more economically viable. Money is going to get into there, and that's not always the best thing for people pursuing mental health or pursuing the best case for them. And especially with our work, veterans will need a certain parameters or certain way of getting into it. And so, how we've sort of developed our program over time is really heavy focus on the preparation, answering all the questions, easing any issues in terms of nervousness. But then the pre-integration phase of like, okay, we're going to do this. Are you serious about it? There's some work to be done in terms of like changing your diet, really starting to look inwards, figuring out what are the causes of these issues. Keep asking why, like, why am I feeling that? What are the causes around it? And start looking inwards. And then, on the afterwards, you have to follow up. There are some things that physically have shown to like continue to change, but there is also, as Daniel mentioned, perception changes. And, sort of these realizations that like, hey, I'm destroying my life, or I'm bad in this relationship, or I keep making these same sort of patterns. And you can kind of have that clean slate to make new changes. But if you're not enforcing the positive neural pathways, if you're not changing lifestyles and, how you go about life, you're probably going to fall back into old habits, old grooves. And so that's the post sort of integration phase in terms of, okay, hold you accountable. How do we keep you on that course? How do we keep you thinking about this sort of stuff? If you have, when depression, anxiety all comes back, then, you have these tools. And, I think that's where microdosing can also play a big part, as Adam and Dan also kind of mentioned.
Thank you. That's a really in-depth answer there. Daniel, do you have any more to add on that, and what you feel, are the tools to maintain and improve and grow on this experience once you've started?
Yeah, I think, Jesse, I was lucky enough to go to a ayahuasca experience with him and two veterans in Tarapoto in Peru. And one of the things that struck me was the preparation. And again, talking about these lifestyle changes as far as sleep and diet, supplementation go, that can enhance the efficacy of this medicine. And I was actually 8 months into my journey with a clear QEEG, with clear blood work. And I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do this. And then, am I going to mess anything up? Like, I talk to so many high operating individuals, and that's the one thing they all think is going to happen when they do a big psychedelic experience. It's like, I'm going to lose everything. And actually, it's going to help refine you, right? And it's going to help put you into more intuition, into the moment. And that's really where we intake the most data. So it'll just enhance all of your skill sets, right? And but when I went and committed to that, a lot of preparation, With ayahuasca, I think it's a little bit different in mushrooms because I was obviously in the high jungle, and it was hard to be in the wrong, setting. And my set or my intention was very real. I've always had this fear of the unknown, and the biggest unknown is death. And I've had a lot of death around me in the last 4 years, and I just wanted to reconnect with my grandparents and Ray Emery and some former teammates that passed, and then really get some clarity on neurodegenerative disease and ask myself these questions and ask the spirits if I'm on the right path. And I got those answers, and it was a really beautiful experience. But then it was also afterwards communication with Jesse and integrating those lessons that I saw during that experience into my everyday life. So I've had 15 years of talk therapy as well. And when I start to, for me, I know what my triggers are. Life happens, it compounds. We have so much stimulation around us at all times that you are bound to get stressed and bogged back down into your old destructive thought patterns, and you can slip back into them. But recognizing that we're slipping into them is recognizing when we need to possibly use the medicine if we can't fix it ourselves. So this medicine just helps us recognize. And for me, it's isolation, oversleeping or undersleeping. And one of the simplest things, when I snap at my kids for absolutely no reason, it's like, oh boy, you have to look at your life. And then I look back in, and usually there's stress with work because there's just things that I shouldn't be doing. And if I can't figure them out on my own, this is where the microdosing really helps as far as the mood stabilization. And if it's really something where I'm trying to make a big decision, whether it's life or business, that's when I use the medicine. That's when I'm called back in. And then again, it's really with mushrooms, it's really key for the set, the intention of why you're using it, because this medicine exasperates what is at the forefront of our mind. And then the setting. So if I play Metallica, I'm going to have a different experience than if I play the spa music that you hear, right? Different hertz of music, and then just integrating again those lessons that we see. So as long as all of that's managed with the proper dosage and you have a proper guide, I think you can have a wonderful experience. That being said, I don't think there's such thing as a bad trip. There's definitely challenging trips, but those are usually the most fruitful when you wake up the next morning.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important what you've both said there, to the idea that, this very much is a journey. And although those initial ceremonies are this big sort of breakthrough moment, it's not a sort of, one shot and you're done.
Yeah, it's not like that. Yeah,
something you have to commit to working on. And so, Adam, as somebody who helps people do that, how do you, somebody arrives, how do you look at them and work out what they need and advise to them, what the journey is going to look like for them?
Yeah, well, everybody is a unique individual, and every experience with psychedelics is going to be unique to that individual. When I'm working with somebody, there are 3 C's that are really important. That's coaching, community, and connection. And I think that that's one of the really big problems with veterans when they get out, and with hockey players or athletes when they retire, is they've lost their community and connection. They've lost their role and their identity, and they feel hopeless and lost. And it starts with me. I'm the first part of their community. I'm their coach. I check in with them. I work on their diet plans, their exercise plans. I process with them. We talk over what their intentions are, what they want to work on. And all of a sudden, people are supported. And for a lot of people, it's the first time in their life. Not only that, the psychedelic community and the microdosing community is a community, and we are here for each other. And people aren't used to that. So when they get into that community and they get into support groups and they hear from other people that are similar to them, they feel that connection again. And all of a sudden they've gone from veteran and athlete to psychonaut or psychedelic person connected in the psychedelic community. So that's the most important thing that I'm giving them as a coach is, first of all, we're educating them. We're going over all of the details on how this works, what's best for them. We're individualizing their protocols, how often they're going to take it during the week, their dosages, everything. So we're really taking the care to individualize it, but also to connect them to a community. And for people that are suffering from addiction or depression, even in my struggles, I made myself a hermit. I was a recluse. I was depressed. I didn't want to have people see how horrible I was. And that's where people really need connection to community. So that's really what sets the psychedelic space, in my opinion, different from even the cannabis space or something like that, is just this greater sense of community, right? We're not here to make money. We're here to help people. It's about plants over pills, decriminalizing nature, and get people back to their sovereign right to be able to use these medicines safely and effectively to treat themselves. So most importantly for me, I think, and for most people, especially the veterans and the athletes after they retire, is a connection to community, and letting them know that there's people there to support them.
Thank you. Thank you. So for all of you then, going forward, we still exist in a situation where we're talking about illicit drugs. There is obviously some leeway going on in for compassionate use in Canada and in some states in America, but particularly where I am in the UK, and a lot of states in America, it's still very much an illegal drug. And so what would you like the future to look like for A, psychedelic drug use, but also B, the healing of veterans and sports people? And that particularly in light of, one of the key points of this talk around the growing evidence of head trauma and its chronic implications. And, further to that, what barriers do you think, what barriers currently exist that we need to cross before we can get there? I'll ask that to you, Jesse, first.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I'll hit the last one. There's a lot of barriers, but fortunately in the past 10, 20 years, we're starting to overcome it, really gaining a lot of momentum. Rick Doblin Maps has a lot to do with that. And even, the psilocybin studies at Johns Hopkins. So there's been a lot of great players that have helped keep the information alive behind the scenes and push it forward. But the big thing in all our countries is stigma, changing the minds from that like crazy hippie psychedelic mentality that we all get that flash when we hear the word psychedelic, and then also the legal aspects. It's Schedule 1 or whatever the restrictive scheduling in different countries, and that doesn't protect people. That actually makes all of these substances more dangerous and prevents protocols from being formed. And so, in the veteran community, I think this is outside of even psychedelics. There's a problem here. Like something this effective should not have taken this long to be researched or be talked about or be used for mental health. So we really need to look at the system that, one, banned these and made these illegal, but two, also why for veterans, these organizations were not listening to the people on the ground. These veterans have been suffering from PTSD, depression. We knew MDMA was helpful back in the 80s and maybe even before that, and it was still illegal. We knew psilocybin was helpful for addiction and a lot of these other issues back in the 50s, and it was still banned. And with all sorts of veteran issues, you see it come up every 10 years. Now it's exposure to burn pits. It took decades for Agent Orange to be addressed and even reimbursed or treated. So it's, why does this keep happening that we're not listening to the soldiers on the ground suffering? So that's what we're hoping to do with psychedelics, bring in, as Adam said, these communities around this, but then also really ask these questions of what's going on and why aren't we, even though we all say that we support the troops, why aren't we actually supporting the troops? And so I hope we have more discussion around mental health, around why effective treatments are not getting the funding, the attention going forward, because psychedelics is just one of them, and I think there's many others. If you just look at the research around cannabis, like it's severely lacking, and it's because there's no economic model. So we need to change the dynamic around like just because it's not going to make some company rich, we should still be able to research these and look into these things and have some sort of, focus on mental health and not just focus on profits. And that's a barrier in itself. I don't know the direct course for that, but conversations and discussions and great people that are on this call, I think are going to help form and create this sort of new dynamic, these new infrastructures.
Thank you. Same question to Daniel. I'm particularly interested to hear what you feel, particularly around the idea of head trauma in sports. I mean, just today in the UK, there's been something brought forward, from footballers heading the ball, who've developing dementia and ending up in really awful situations. And it really starts from sports recognizing and acknowledging that.
Yeah, we've, the NFL, the NHL specifically have done a huge disservice. We're in 2020 right now, and we have no validated TBI endpoints, which is absurd to me because the first punch drunk case was identified in a punch drunk boxer described as dementia pugilistica back in 1928. So I was in a league where my friend, who's no longer with us, got cleared for 19 concussions, 19 documented concussions by medical professionals. And so you find yourself in a situation. I've dissected the TBI community, and we know the good actors, the bad actors. And what we're looking to do is work with insurers and healthcare providers that truly care to figure out these validated TBI endpoints. Because what I've seen over the last 6 years is that there's a subsection of the community that suffers more. So I think that we can do more for that 30% in helping to identify hey, buddy, you've had 9, maybe it's time to step away. And then in combination with that, as far as it pertains to psychedelics, I started in advocacy. I accessed this medicine through a decriminalized state and bartered and didn't break any laws necessarily to save my life, but put me in front of a judge and I will tell the truth because I truly don't think I would be here without that model. So I truly believe in the decriminalized nature model. I offered my testimony, the Board of Elections in DC, right beside Jesse, and I think it has its place. That being said, when I was suicidal, was I going to go out, get a monotub, spores, and grow this stuff? Was I in the condition to do that? Absolutely not. With veterans, when they go to the VA, with a lot of this head trauma or chemical imbalances that are forming in the way of anxiety and depression, they get prescribed Adderall and benzodiazepines and opiates. How do we change that system? The only way that I see fit to change that system is if you raise a lot of money and you go through the proper channels and regulatory bodies, which includes Health Canada and the FDA. And so that's what one part of our business is doing is we've been able to, luckily through a lot of the investor community that truly believes in my mission. And I think people know by now what I stand for over the last 6 years, that we're truly trying to do this the right way and with the right people. And that includes people from MAPS that have this extensive relationship. And I just feel really, really lucky to start in the advocacy world because I have the trust of those people. And truly, those are the organizations that are a lot further along than any other for-profit company. I've chosen to go public with my company in April to put everybody else on guard, to show people that if you don't have indication filings against patents, then what are you truly doing? And so there are ways that I truly believe that we can help. And we are, again, I'm limited to researching symptomology because there are no endpoints. But luckily, what we've been able to do through my journey is collect 19 months of data. And we're going to use that to try to validate some of these endpoints in the future. And really what our goal is to treat TBI-related symptomology and bring that through an FDA-regulated, Health Canada-regulated clinical trials to have a prescription for veterans when they need help and have something that's derived from a plant medicine and fungi. That being said, I know not everybody's going to be able to access this because, let's be honest, the therapist model right now, it might be a really just a rich white drug for a little while. Now, that's why I think that veteran organizations and using the funds in a really poignant manner to get people access who will come from these lower income communities or can't afford, I think is extremely important. And so we're creating a lot of partnerships in that sense to continue to move with the right people that I truly met in my advocacy work. And we'll do everything in our power to not look like a traditional big pharma. We will provide things immediately for the TBI community that they can tap into, like proper diet, nutrition, coaching, and just really just trying to help. And that's kind of been the mission since day one. So, but I really truly feel like, so when I started just talking about this, I thought I could help one or two people, right? Talking against the NHL on these concussion protocols, going to these clinics, realizing there's no standard of care, realizing how dangerous that is. And then it was, all right, now I found psilocybin. Through the decrim model, I could hopefully help 1,000, maybe 10,000 people. And then now not leaving behind either of those other two models, but taking another step, and maybe we could help 1 million now. That's the only way that we can get it to the UK and to you, Grace, is through these trials, truly. So we have to spend the money. We have to partner with the right organizations and people. We've done that. And yeah, I'm just really excited to keep moving through that process.
No, that's super exciting. It's amazing that you have an answer for that question that is, I'm already doing something. So Adam, lastly, kind of the same question to you, and perhaps more so for the idea of you who is already giving this therapy to others. What do you see? What would you like the future to look like? You come out of well, anyone really, but particularly for this talk, you come out of a sports or military career. What would that look like for you, the right therapy?
Well, I hope first that the decriminalized nature model works and is passed, and that everybody has the opportunity to grow, gift, and gather, right? We can't make this legal for business and not still allow people to potentially treat themselves that maybe can't afford the therapy or the higher medicine. So we do need to continue to do that kind of work. And again, we also need to honor the indigenous people and the people that have brought these medicines forward, and make sure that if we are making these medicines for profit, that we are taking care of these communities and giving them back to them, and giving them a seat at the table as well. I hope for a day quickly where potentially microdosing can be something that's prescribed from a therapist to their patient, specifically veterans, athletes, people that are suffering from mental health conditions. There is a way with microdosing that you can add niacin, and then there's no concern of an overdose. If the individual was to try and take their whole bottle of microdoses, the niacin would flush it out of their system, and it would be counteractive. So I think there are safe and effective ways to bring microdosing to the people. I think at first it should be potentially with the prescription, and you should have an integration coach, specialist, or therapist that is tracking you along the journey. It could be similar to cannabis that started under Prop 215 in California, where you had to get a doctor's prescription to begin with. You had to have qualifying conditions. And then again, we want to take it a step farther in the psychedelic community. We don't want to just give you the prescription. We want to track you and follow you and work with you to get that endpoint. And what I want to say briefly about TBI, which is so important with psilocybin, is we don't have anything for serious brain injury. Somebody hits their head and destroys their brain, or later in life, Alzheimer's, dementia, neurodegenerative conditions. It's super sad. We have nothing for it. And we're finding through citizen scientists and all these anecdotal stories that these subthreshold doses are helping people with everything from traumatic brain injury to people in their 90s with Alzheimer and dementia. So what I think is so exciting about psilocybin is I think we finally have an answer and a tool to not only rewire, but increase neuroplasticity and re-heal the brain. And I think that that is probably the most fascinating thing going on in the world right now, is that a mushroom can regrow and re-heal your brain. And it's not just psilocybin, it's lion's mane in conjunction with that. So how amazing that we may have an answer to traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer, dementia, all neurodegenerative conditions. I mean, that should win a Nobel Peace Prize. We should put that on Time Magazine. The mushroom should be the person of the year. Like, we really need to be talking about this more. Like, you can take a sub-threshold dose of psilocybin and lion's mane, and it can wake people up from dementia and Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative states. So I want to shout it from the mountaintops. Let's get this out to the people.
Amazing.
Love it, man.
Well, thank you, Adam, Daniel, and Jesse, for what has been just, not only incredibly insightful, but really passionate and personal accounts of your use of psychedelics. Unfortunately, we've even slightly run over the time we've been given. So I'll hand back over to Deborah before we go over any more.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Grace. And thanks to all of you guys for contributing like that and inspiring us all. I've got a couple of questions from our attendees. This is for Jesse. Krista was asking, have you yourself ever worked with psychedelics in conjunction with other family members? If so, have you and your loved ones found it helpful as a group? And I guess any of you can also add to that afterwards, but Jesse, it was directed at you first.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we don't get to your questions, feel free to go to the website, heroicheartsproject.org, and you can email us, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Yeah, I mean, I have. I'm a personal, and I've seen different combinations, and there's no right answer. You have to kind of figure out, like, yourself, with your loved ones, with your family. I'm kind of a personal believer in that you should try to heal yourself first, and then once you get to a good level, then maybe bring in like the family members. Because like for me, what I found is with people that I know and care about, oftentimes my head is kind of more concerned about them during the trip, and I'm not necessarily giving myself the due attention or that focus. And so you can do it, but I do strongly recommend you at least try to do a lot of self work. It's one of those things, like you gotta heal yourself before you can heal others, right? And you have to do that, and then you can sort of expand outwards from there. But again, there's no right answers. There's not like a set course for this. And just always proceed cautiously and have it under the right parameters with people who know what they're doing.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, right? Daniel, someone has asked if alongside your TBR impairments, you retained a functional intact part of yourself that allowed you to read papers and advocate for yourself and reflect, where and what would be a place to start reaching those to those who are suffering, who don't see and hear, who haven't done the research, who don't know where to go? How do people who are around them help them get to where you're at?
Yeah, well, that's just the thing. And that's why I really do feel like there is a place for decrim and then for the for-profit model, because the study that I saw was done in academia that convinced me that this could be a novel validated care option for TBI survivors, and that cost money. And that was from Robin Carhart Harris, 2014, to the placebo brain, the brain on psilocybin, communicating that at a rate that's never been seen before. So that really convinced me that this could work for TBI. And I would just say, after I saw that study, then I dove in. NYU, all of the studies that they've done, more of the Imperial College of London publications, there's over 100 of them. There's over 70 Johns Hopkins University publications. And so right now I'm in talks with all the major sports leagues and their chief medical officers. And the one question I get is, how can you draw a link between psilocybin and it helping TBI? Because TBI is extremely different in the way that there's neurological issues, structural issues, physiological issues like anxiety and depression, and it attacks your central nervous system. And the one study that I always point to is the terminally ill cancer patients from Johns Hopkins University, where again, all of our biggest fear is the unknown, and I believe death. And if I give you a terminal diagnosis, you're going to die in 3 months. You're probably going to have a lot of anxiety and depression, right? One psilocybin treatment took away that anxiety and depression in 90% of the participants. And so if it can do that for terminally ill cancer patients facing death, then imagine what it can do for you or for TBI survivors. So that's the study that I posed to them. And again, just done responsibly, I really think and truly believe we're researching psychedelics through the FDA and Health Canada pathway with Wesana Health. But as we do that, we're creating a community for TBI survivors. We and saunas heal in Latin. I truly believe we heal together. And that's been my journey. And so there's things that we can do right now for TBI survivors in the way of just signaling to the noise that they can change their diet and create that community. And then as we research this, it's going to take 4 to 5 years. We put this medicine into that promotes neurogenesis into a standardized protocol, because right now, if you hit your head, I just talked to a girl in Florida by the pool. Her son fell, smoked his head, was disoriented. I could tell that he had some type of brain injury. And so I just went up to her and said, maybe you should make sure that you wake your child up every 4 hours tonight. Make sure that you're just keeping an eye on him over the next 2 weeks. If he's still acting out of the norm or not acting normal, then go to a doctor and get a diagnosis, because now you're in the post-concussion syndrome stage. And she was like, my gosh, thank you. I didn't know all this. Of course you didn't know all this. Nobody knows this. Nobody knows where to get baselined, diagnosed, rehab, and then optimized. And so that's something that Wesana Health is creating with medical professionals and insurers and healthcare providers in conjunction with researching this medicine, because we need that. If we don't have that, then where do we access the medicine? How do we know that we're hurt? So that's something that I'm very, very passionate about, and just really excited to be able to be well funded to be able to do that.
Thanks, Daniel. And I wanted to ask you, Grace, as well, because we haven't really heard from you, and you're a researcher, have been doing a lot of work on it. And I just like to get your point of view, and I know we've had some comments as well to hear where you are at your research, what people can expect and from this research.
Yeah, so my role currently as the Heroic Hearts UK Research Director, I'm currently actually acting for both the UK and the US arm in starting a new study that is going to be particularly based around the use of psilocybin therapy for veterans who we're going to identify as having been in roles that were similar to what Jessie was in. So a lot of proximity to explosions, a lot of concussive force, sort of that kind of thing. And so that's something that we're going to run very soon. That is really an incredibly novel study. I've done a lot of digging in the literature to try and, put together proposals, et cetera, about this. And what we know at the moment is still reasonably disjointed. What we understand is this link that head trauma leads to psychological distress. Exactly how that is, we have best guesses of. And then we know what the use of psychedelics does. And for me, from what I understand, if I was to put forward what I think my theory is on this, when you have a head trauma, you end up with an awful lot of neuroinflammation in the brain. That happens both acutely and chronically. And from that, you end up with not only chronic inflammation, which is highly linked to depression. You have a bunch of chemicals that persist in the brain that reduce a lot of sort of good things that go on. But you also end up with some neurons dying and just general decrease in the amount that your brain can be plastic. So think, make new connections. And what we see when people take psilocybin is the absolute opposite of that. Decreasing of neuroinflammatory markers. We see that people have increased level of chemicals, like I think Adam mentioned earlier, chemicals like BDNF that increase neurogenesis. And further to that is increased brain plasticity. And what does that really mean? Well, increased brain plasticity is new ways of thinking. You know, you can literally have your brain think in ways that you wouldn't be able to before because you have this. And further to it all really comes down to very much more of the psychological side of it. The opportunity for, you know, from a macro dose, having this psychedelic experience and people really changing their mindset, deciding, you know what, I am going to get off the couch. I am going to go and I'm going to, you know, engage more with my family. I'm going to explore new ideas. You know, suddenly things make a little bit more sense, seem a little bit more real. That psychological push that people get from taking these drugs sometimes can be what eventually gets them to the finish line. You know, with depression, often it's getting off the couch in the first place that can be the hardest part. And that's something that these drugs really, really offer. You know, I wish I could tell you more as far as what the research tells us, but there's so much on the way. This is, you know, I've been in the cannabis field for a number of years, and, you know, okay, that field is still lacking, but, you know, there's so much more there than there is in psychedelics because of the legality. And the next few years, from what I know that's going on, is going to be amazing. And I will find it very difficult to believe that the legislators will be able to ignore the evidence that's going to come forward, that has already come forward and is going to come forward about the potential and therapeutic potential behind psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, 100%. Agreed. And if not, we'll join Adam on the mountaintop screaming it out for sure. And that's what this is all about, is us all talking about it, making a fuss and making a noise. And so thank you guys all for contributing. And I think we can all agree that it's I've heard it along the whole discussion that it's not a magic pill, and that there's still work to be done. And the neuroplasticity is giving us the ability to learn and to integrate and make changes. And you guys are role models for all of us. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Grace, for moderating beautifully today. And I hope to speak to you all soon. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us. I'll just say to everyone to stay tuned, because we're going to actually be having a ketamine masterclass on April 11th, 12th, and 13th. I know it is not psilocybin, but it is something that is available and helping people. And we're going to be having interesting classes on that. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day and a great week.